Welcome to the second episode of the Friday Featured Artist, brought to you by Infinite Source Art. I'm Mike, and with me today I have Erik van Mechelen. Erik is a fiction writer and novelist from Minneapolis who just released his second novel, Sound of Stone, at the beginning of September here. You say you describe your writing as new, weird science fiction and fantasy. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to add to the introduction that I missed?
No, let's jump into it.
Cool. All right, so the first question I have for you is, how did you get started as a writer, Erik?
So I think it started after reading some of those early books, those kind of early young adult science fiction and fantasy that I was delving into in kind of my preteens, that I would steal off my brother's bookshelf. So I remember borrowing Lord of the Rings from him, and it was at a point where I wasn't a good enough reader to understand all the words. But then my mom came home from a parent-teacher conference and was really excited about the teacher sharing a story with her about a moon colonization story that I had not only written but illustrated. And I think that was one of the first stories that I remember writing that I got some feedback on. And then, from there, I continued reading and also writing quite avidly. I remember a very Hobbit-esque short story that I wrote in 8th grade that I got good comments on. But at that point I was still imitating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as I got into college and submitted to a few contests, that's when I started doing more of the creative writing versus the imitating. I had a short story about a cross-cultural friendship between an Indonesian and an American teenager. At the time, before I attended university, I was living in Indonesia, so you can imagine where that came from. But that got me started, and then I worked in corporate for a while, and about 4 years ago I decided I was really going to get started at the age of 27 on fiction writing, and that's where both Rise to the Roz and Sound of Stone, my first two novels, came out of.
Mm-hmm. And that first one came out just earlier this summer as well, right?
That's right. That's sort of the prequel in the same universe, the same world as Sound of Stone.
Very cool. So you kind of jumped into that second question actually already with your inspirations, talking about Lord of the Rings. Who else would you say has inspired you, either just to write in general or your chosen genre to write?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really fascinating things I think about doing conversations like these. So, in looking at what you're doing with Infinite Source Art and seeing how you're setting that up, it's quite impressive and inspiring. And but in terms of just the medium of fiction, because we all have these different mediums that we're working in as artists, I look at obviously other writers, throughout the ages, and in the last 80 or 90 years, as fantasy and speculative fiction has really seen this big outgrowth, I have looked at the kind of new weird writers. So they sort of have a tradition in Lovecraft and people like Mervyn Peake or Hodgson, who wrote House on the Borderlands, and then coming up through writers like China Miéville, who's a British author, or even more recently, kind of peaking is Jeff Vandermeer. And these are sort of weird fiction writers that are writing speculatively, but they're also in the science fiction and fantasy and supernatural subgenres, and actually hard to pin down, because at least how it looks to me is that they're stretching and playing with the boundaries of what the genres are conventionally doing, while also staying true to some of those traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at those authors, and when I look at where I am in my writing career, if there's an early, mid, and late career, I'm certainly in the early stages. And so even though I downplayed the imitation in my first answer, I still feel like I'm looking at those authors and what they're doing as, and then it's reflecting back on what I do in a sense.
Absolutely.
If I can do something that they did, and someone can say, "Hey, that feels like a lot like Mieville or Vandermeer," like that's a huge, win.
So when you sit down to write, do you have a particular process that you follow?
So, I thought about this. I think about this all the time actually, because if I have a set amount of time which is unknown on this planet, then I want to get the process right. And the one thing that I have decided for now, temporarily, is that I want to have some kind of mechanism in my reflection or how I think about my work that always allows my process to evolve. And that means that I can transform as the situations change, as what I'm searching to do within my work changes. So I can actually illustrate that conveniently with a map that we included in Sound of Stone. And I'll just hold this. I'll show you this, and then I'll just show the camera briefly. But what's interesting about this map, the details don't matter. What's interesting about it is that as you get into the story, you realize this map is very limited in terms of the world that it explores, and that's from a conceptual level where I want to stay as an artist. I want there to always be quite a bit more unknown than there is known. So from a very specific standpoint of what I'm doing as I structure a novel, it's very common that I have some kind of understanding of the characters and the setting, but that the middle and end are a little bit or quite a bit unknown, at least in my first draft. So that's something I learned in writing the first two books, is that allows me to be a little bit more creative. There's some structure there after I write the first draft, but then I can be creative within that structure once I reach that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. How about setting? Do you tend to write at home? Do you go out to coffee shops? Is there anything specific there that kind of helps you get going at the beginning of the day?
It's what occurs to me is one of my favorite journalists. He's the late Christopher Hitchens. Always used to answer this question by saying, "Well, my day starts depending on what happened the previous night." But what I try to do now is get up and read something short, and this is not a typical day, but I'll try to read something short and then write the first. Have a block of time where I'm writing. I can do that from my apartment. I really like doing it there because that's a known space that I feel really safe within, and then I can let my mind go where it needs to go. But I also like getting out in the world and taking inspiration from the world around me, since that's part of what it is to be a human, and that brings me to libraries and coffee shops and bookshops too.
Yeah, I can definitely feel you there. I tend to like to just sketch a little bit while I drink my coffee and then move on to either jumping into a painting or another project that I'm working on. But I definitely find if I stay in the house too long, if I don't take the time to get out and step away for a little while, things kind of get bogged down, and like I don't seem to be making any ground, even though I'm trying to get at things.
That's so interesting, because two of my kind of later influences in writing Sound of Stone were both Nietzsche and Carl Jung. And Jung thought at one point that one of Nietzsche's downfalls was that he didn't have a routine, he didn't get out of the house, and so he came up with amazing philosophical writings, but then it looks like he went crazy. Whereas Jung had a routine, and that allowed him to continue doing his also like quite experimental and imaginative work for a long period of time. So it seems like that's something to watch out for too.
So I should probably try to stay social a little bit. Interact, yeah.
For sure.
How do you stay motivated in either moments of self-doubt, in the face of setbacks, or when the creative pursuit just seems like an endless uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. An endless uphill battle is something that I look for now, because I've been thinking about I've been reading some writers who talk about the relationship between meaning and responsibility, and I think, like, as artists, like, I don't know if this is how it is for you, but I feel something of a call to do it. It's not maybe the best language. I could come up with a different language for that, but there's something of a call, and there's also this feeling that if I could look back in 50 years and we could say that was Erik's early career, and he had a mid and late career, and that's where he started to begin this journey of being in discussion with other literary artists, and maybe even at a more ambitious level, the like grand scope of the literary conversation across all time, that would be sort of the grandest sort of epic meaning level that I could think of from a motivational. But also there's the more banal seeming motivations of I'm running from the future of where I would go back to work in a corporate environment. And so that equally gets me up out of bed every morning, because that's a really painful future if I were to have left a corporate environment to pursue this journey, which I felt I was called to do, but then had to face some reality of it not working out. So there's an equal push and pull there, I feel.
Very cool. And we've talked about it a little bit beforehand. Despite writing fiction, you also dig into conflicts that seem to be inherent to our own world, and kind of digging in how to find purpose within that chaos. So I think that's definitely something I've heard from you as something that you are shooting for, and kind of what you were saying there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, when I think, to just tie that thread to what I said in the beginning, from a responsibility, like I actually feel that you were just showing me your space here and where you work, where you do your music and your painting, and you can see that you sort of crafted this space within your environment to do the work that needs to be done. And so I feel like there are artists, out there and within us. There's a piece of us that needs to do that work, and that's a responsibility that we have. And there are managers and other types of folk that once an institution is established, we need those kind of people too. So I kind of feel that societal level of responsibility too, in a sense. It's not only about how it makes me feel.
I feel you're there. Would you like to take a moment and just read an excerpt out of the new book, Sound of Stone?
I'd love to. Thank you. So I'll be reading verse 1 from Sound of Stone. The reason there are verses is because this story takes place in the sense of a translated song that has been passed down across many generations through this musical species. And so this is a human translation of that. Verse 1, Tremors. Shay wasn't fond of the flame mistress's outbursts, but tremors were part of life in the known caverns. Great seas of fire were set to rest beneath their subterranean world, and she could stir them to make the cavern shake. She was in your heart too. Step wrong, and she would rattle your insides. To pass the time and keep their wits, the wilders sang. The great musical mammals with their multitude of vocal cords conjured irresistible vibrations. Their musical melange carried a strange quality, beauty, and grace that brought the sea bats from their cliff dens and the glowworm colonies to life in the cave's corners, writhing uncontrollably in a light-emitting dance. The cave shook anew. Tight to her chest, Shay held her knees, scraped from a rare mistake she'd made hunting,
and nuzzle deeper into Nim's coarse yet comforting furs. Shay had been with the Wilders for 3 intervals, the time between quakes, as she struggled to fit in with humans here in the shadows. This particular troupe of Wilder outcasts produced improvisational riffs on 1,000-interval Wilder themes. As outcasts detached from their origin troops, though, they also intentionally strayed and energetically explored the landscape of sound. It seemed effortless, and their mistakes were either quickly discarded or embraced by their peers as novelties. Guttural hums like the wind through a cavern, the trill of avian song, even the growls and hisses of the jags. In their leisure time, they crafted instruments with nimble fingers, toes, claws, and teeth. Stone, bone, even a spider's web, each was a material of their craft. To the Wilders, any salvaged thing contained potentialities.
Thank you for that. Definitely, I feel like I'm drawn in, and definitely look forward to picking up my own copy. And
Well, speaking of that, I'd like to give you this copy as a
Oh, wow.
gift for doing this.
well, thank you. I do appreciate it, and I will get right into that. Like I said, I'm excited to read it, and I do appreciate your time joining me here today. So, cheers to that.
Cheers. It's been a great discussion. Thank you.
And all of you out there, stay tuned for future Friday featured artists.